Hello everyone, Gaara here, and today I want to welcome you guys to my very first deck tech video. The deck I'm going to talk about today is a very interesting deck, and this is the deck I used mainly in the DreamHack in Bucharest, and it was my main deck, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the class in general and the deck type and why I chose to play this specific deck, and I go quickly over the cards, like why I chose certain cards. Okay, first of all, I approach tournaments and ladder differently. I don't think that the same decks are as good as in ladder and in tournaments. So the reason why I think that is because in tournaments you usually have some sort of understanding who you're going to be up against in the first round, and you need specific decks for specific situations, which means you want to have a counter deck for specific decks which your first deck is weak against. And when you queue up ladder, you don't know who you're going to be up against, and you're going to play a deck which is good. You're going to play a deck which has the highest win ratio in the current meta. So if there are like a lot of zoos playing, and so you play a deck which is good against zoo, for example, and when people start playing rogue, you play a deck which is good against rogue, and when people just play hunter, you play a deck which is good against hunter, and so forth. And in tournaments, the chance is really high. I would say it's easy above 80% that the first deck you will be up against will be some sort of a control deck. And that is very important information. Above 80% is a really high chance. This is just from my personal tournament experiences in best of threes, and even in Swiss when people only play one deck. It is most of the time control type deck, because it's just the most consistent type of deck. Aggro decks usually can also have quite a consistent win ratio, but most of the good players don't feel confident to play an aggro deck in a tournament. So most people start with a control deck in the first round, and that is really important, and this is also the main reason why I chose to play a control deck as my first deck. And as some of you know, or most of you know, I won with this deck. I won my most games, and I was really successful with it. So the reason why I chose to play Druid is I want to limit the amount of RNG, not about amount of RNG I can get from specific cards. And in my opinion, Druid is the class with the least amount of RNG in the game, besides Warrior. And yeah, so I really like the class for a tournament specifically, compared to Shaman, for example, or even Hunter. So now I have the class I want to play, the class which has the highest chance to have a decent opener, a decent draw, and is in general really good against any type of deck. I'm going to be up against, specifically control decks, because I know before the game even starts that the chance that I will face any type of control deck is really high. So I'm creating a deck which is good for control matchups, and the best deck for control matchups is a really good control deck, in my opinion. And I chose Druid because I'm really comfortable with the class, and I chose specifically my personal style of ramp Druid, and I will go over the cards in a bit. The reason why I chose ramp Druid over mid-range or watcher Druid is because I will win most of my mirror matches, or even every mirror match, as at the DreamHack, because Druid is a class that has really big problems dealing with big creatures. That is also the reason why Handlock, for example, is a good counter to Druid in general, because Druid has big problems to deal with the giants and big creatures in general. And when you play Ramp Druid, you play a lot of big creatures yourself, so when you play a Druid mirror match, you have the advantage before the game even starts, because you play big creature and you know the opponent Druid will have big problems to deal with those creatures. The problem with this deck is that it is slow. You will not have a lot of creatures in the early phases of the game, so you will have troubles against decks who also are really slow and follow a specific strategy. For example, Miracle Rogue. Miracle Rogue just wants to draw cards and stall the game till you can play the Auctioneer with Conceal and then draw endless amount of cards and win the game. So you can't put enough of pressure in the early game to force the rogue player to use his important cards to win the game. So yeah. The next thing I wanted to talk about is so now I talked about why I wanted to play Druid, and the reason why I don't want to play RNG specific cards is, let me give you an example. Like when you play, for example, Mid-Range Hunter in a tournament and you have one important match you have to win, right? And you play Animal Companion and you really need Misha, for example, in a specific situation, because it's much better than a Huffer. Because let's say we play against a Druid, it's our turn 3, and it's most likely that he will play a Keep of the Grove in turn 4. And I'm gonna play Animal Companion and I got Huffer. So he can play Keep of the Grove next turn, kill your Huffer for free, and has the board control. Compared to a Misha, the difference is insane, because he can't kill off your Misha and probably has to use a swipe, which you won't have for your Hounds later, and have no board, or just play the Keeper, deal 2 damage, and then you can remove the Keeper otherwise. It's a huge difference depending on the RNG you get from the card, and I think this kind of playstyle is really inconsistent in tournaments, and that's why I chose to play Druid over Hunter, even though most players played Hunter as their main deck. I had also Hunter in one of my 3 decks because it's really consistent regardless of the RNG. because it has the strongest card combination in the game right now, which is Unleash the Hounds plus Buzzer plus Timberwolf, which is board clear, card draw, and board development at the same time for a really low amount of mana cost. But it has too much RNG, in my opinion, to be good enough as a first deck. So I chose to play Druid instead, and as it turns out it was the right decision because I ended up winning the Dream Hack. Okay, I wanna go here over the cards, and it's really interesting. The deck is really interesting, as you will see, because I don't play really big minions like Ysera or Alexstrasza. Only very few of those, and I will go over that in a bit. So I got the Innovates, which is pretty standard. You will play 2 Innovates in every Druid deck because it is one of the strongest cards in the game. When you can play like an 80 in turn 1, it is really hard to deal with a 4/5 creature for any class, any deck this early in the game. I play 2 Mark of the Wilds, and I play also a lot of other taunt classes, just for mainly because of the aggro matchups and against Leroy combos and stuff like that. Because it's in some games I will drop really low on life early if someone has a good start, and because I play Ramp Druid, I will not have my answers early on, so I really need to have many big taunters to come back into the game. That's also why I play 2 Mark of the Wild, and another reason why I play Mark of the Wild is because of the synergy with Black Knight and Sylvanas. When I play Mark of the Wild with Sylvanas, he is forced to kill my creature, and I can take over one of his creatures, and also I can combo it with the BGH if I have to. For example, if the opponent plays a Ragnaros and I have Sylvanas, I can use Sylvanas, Mark of the Wild, and BGH. If he doesn't kill Sylvanas and I have to kill my Sylvanas myself. The same synergy goes for Black Knight and Mark of the Wild. I can Mark of the Wild the opponent minion, let's say Ragnaros or a giant, and kill it with the Black Knight if people decide to play around Black Knight. This also limits one of the big weaknesses of a Druid deck, to be able to deal with big creatures. With this combi, I cannot just buff my own creatures to become really big creatures themselves. I can also get rid of really big creatures very easily. And the next card is Wild Growth. This is a pretty standard card in a Ramp Druid deck. You just want to get extra mana crystals early on. And this is also, now I can also like talk about the muggling, like which cards I'm looking for. I'm basically looking for Innovate and Wild Growth in my starting hand. And against most matchups I will just look for those 2 specific cards. When I know I'm against an aggro Warlock, I will keep Swipe in my starting hand. And against Hunters, I usually also keep 1 Swipe, because you need 1 AoE to deal with a lot of 1 drops, 1 toughness creatures. Yeah, but those 2 cards are the cards I'm looking for. Even when I don't have any big creatures in my hand at the moment, I know I will draw into them. So Innovate. But in my deck, or in this specific deck, it's not even so bad to have Innovate later on. Usually when you play a Druid deck, let's say a mid-range Druid deck, Innovate is a dead card in the late game, but not in this deck. A really strong play is also the Ancient of War at turn 10, into Innovate Faceless to play 2 Ancient of Wars in the same turn, which is most people can't deal with effectively and will end up losing the game, which is really important. You don't want to have dead cards in your hand at any point of the game. The next card is Breath. It's a really good card and also a situational card and a very flexible card. Sometimes you don't want to use 3 damage on a 1 toughness creature, and sometimes you don't want to take the hit, the 2 damage from a 2/1 creature, so you can easily remove it and replace the card. And this is a good way to get rid of early creatures like Knife Juggler, any 2-drop or 3-drop really, and which you need to stall the game till you be able to put out your own big creatures. This is also a card which I keep in my starting hand if I already draw it against specific matchups, but I don't keep Wrath against control decks, for example Avoria, because there's like almost no minion where Wrath would be useful. You can kill an Acolyte of Pain, which gives the opponent an extra card draw, which is not a good trade, and you can kill a Taskmaster, which is also not a really good trade for yourself. So against the warrior, for example, you look for the wild growths and the innovates and big creatures. So you keep against the warrior, you keep big creatures in your starting hand because these are the cards you want to have. I play 1 Healing Touch. This is really important against aggro decks, because aggro decks will put a lot of pressure against me in the early game, and I just need to heal myself up to just not die to a random burst. But this card also has a lot of synergy with the Ancient of Wars. If people have to, most of the aggro decks have to kill your Ancient of War with physical damage, with minion damage, and it's really hard. And or sometimes you just trade, kill a minion with Ancient of War, and then your Ancient of War is left with like 5 life, 3 life, whatever, and then you can just heal it back up, and it's like playing a new Ancient of War. 2 Healing Touch would be too much because it's a dead card in the early game when you have it, because you need it later on. But 1 Healing Touch is really important to have in this deck. BGH is a really important card as well for tournaments, because you play against a lot of control matchups, and most people play Ragnaros, and warriors play Gromage and Range Gromage, and it has synergy with the Mark of the Wild. You can basically Mark of the Wild any 5 attack creature and kill it with the BGH. You can kill a Highman, like let's say we play against a mid-range hunter and he plays a Timberwolf Highman and it has already 7 attack, or a Mukla with Houndmaster. You can kill all those creatures with a BGH. It's really important to have. And it's also really important against the counter deck, which is Handlock. And you can use the BGH to get rid of giants, which is usually really hard. This limits one of the weaknesses this deck has, big creatures, other big creatures. And it has also really good synergy with the Faceless, which I will talk about in a bit. For example, my opponent plays a Ragnaros, I can Faceless it and then use the BGH, because I will have the 8 mana myself after he plays the Ragnaros, and that is a really huge swing of the game. Swipes are pretty standard in any Druid deck. It's a really flexible card. You can get rid of 1 strong creature. Most of the time you use swipe to get rid of unbound elementals from shamans or mishas, or you can also use it in combination with the Druid hero ability to kill Yetis or 5 toughness creatures. And you can clear the board against the Zoo Warlock because he plays a lot of 1 toughness creatures. And you can clear the board from hounds and stuff like that. And you can also use it as a finisher when the opponent is low on life. It's a really good card. I play 1 Yeti. I realized from my past tournament experience that sometimes when I have Innovate in my starting hand, I only have Keeper of the Grove as a 4-drop. Yeah, I also play the Big Game Hunter as a 3-drop. When I have the Innovate in my starting hand and a big creature, I can't put up the immediate pressure in turn 1 or turn 2 with the Innovate, because I have no creature which is playable. The next creature would be Druid of the Claw, which I could play in turn 3 or turn 2 with the Mana Crystal. So I decided to play 1 Yeti because it can win you the game, the early pressure with a Yeti in turn 1 or turn 2. And even if it doesn't win you the game, it stalls the game long enough till you can ramp up and play your big minions. So that's the reason why I play 1 Yeti for this tournament. I play 2 Keep of the Groves. It's an awesome card and it's one of the best cards in the Druid deck, because silence is a really important battle cry in the current meta game, and Keep of the Grove is probably the best silencer in the game. It's a really good minion with a really good battle cry and good stats, and playing 2 of those is self-explanatory. It's just a really good card. You can also use it in synergy with the Faceless, or you can use it to silence opponent Sylvanas, or if someone facelesses your Ancient of War, you can silence it. It's a really good card. And it kills, which is also really important when you play, for example, against the Zoo deck and he plays Knife Jugglers and you have the Innovate, you can immediately swing the game in turn 2 when you can Innovate Keeper of the Grove and kill his 2 toughness creature for free, because you get the board control and then you can play the Keeper of the Grove into Mark of the Wild and go from there. I play 1 Nourish now. I used to play 2 Nourish, but sometimes when you have 2 Nourish in your hand, it is one of them is most of the time a dead card. You just can't play it. It's really hard to develop a card draw card with relatively high mana costs. When you play Nourish in turn 5, you don't develop a minion in turn 5, so you have to deal with the opponent's minion the next turn. And most of the time I use Nourish to gain the mana crystals to play a really big minion. After I play Nourish, I can play the Ancient of War next turn and that way I can deal with the Yetis or whatever people played in that turn I played the Nourish. I feel like 2 Nourishes are too much in this deck, so I only play 1 right now and I feel really good about it. I would also not remove the 1 Nourish, because sometimes when you play the early game with Innovates, you will not have enough cards and you really need the additional card draw sometimes, not just the Ancient of Lores. It's a really good card to have. And this is the 3rd card draw card, and this is also what I wanted to talk about with the next card. This is also the thing I want to talk about with the next card and why I played the next card, which is Starfall. We used to see Starfall last year in the Druid decks, in the very slow control type Druid decks, which also played Ysera and Ragnaros. And right now I think Starfall is a really good card in this deck, because the swipes, having two swipes is, especially in the games where you have to use one swipe to get rid of one bigger creature, you need one additional AoE spell. It's also really good against Shaman to clear the board from totems, because they have 2 toughness, and Shaman is also one of the counter classes to Druid, and Starfall is really good against that, and it's good against Zoo, because most of the minions a Zoo plays has a 2 toughness, not 1 toughness. So swipe without spell power, and I don't play any spell power. This is also a card which could be played in this deck instead of 1 Mark of the Wild, for example, to play Blood Mage Thanos to get the spell power to make your swipe strong against aggro decks. But Starfall is one of those really versatile cards. You can use it to kill one big minion like a Yeti or any 5 toughness creature, really. A fire elemental. You can even kill a hyena if you silence it. I mean, you can also kill a Hymen with the 5 damage. And or you clear the board from many small minions. I think free board clear cards are the right balance, and that's why I play 1 Starfall. I played 2 Druid of the Claws. Druid is one of the classes that has access to a really strong 5-drop. Not every class has that, and it is a really good card. It has really good stats. 4/6 for a 5-drop with taunt is excellent, and this is the first card in your when you're ramping up, which you want to play as early as possible. When you get the additional mana crystals, you can play it in turn 3, turn 4, and this is the first minion people have problems with to get rid of. And then we go from there. I play double Faceless. Instead of playing my own Ragnaros or Ysera or Alexstrasza, which are really vulnerable to Faceless and which can get easily removed with Big Game Hunter, and they have RNG involved, for example Ragnaros. When I think about a card like Ragnaros, when do you play this card? I play this card when someone plays a big minion like Alexstrasza, and I have no answer to Alexstrasza, so I play the Ragnaros. I have a 50% chance, if he has no other additional minion, to kill that Alexstrasza, and that is not consistent at all. To have only a 50% chance to stay in the game and might have a chance to win, or 50% chance to almost guarantee lose the game. If your Ragnaros misses and he has his own Faceless for your Ragnaros, additionally to the Alexstrasza, you will be at 15 life at that point because he played Alexstrasza, and if he facelesses your Ragnaros, he either kills you or kills your Ragnaros for free. Terrible. So instead of playing my own Ragnaros or my own Cairn, because all those cards are really vulnerable to Faceless, or my own Ysera, as I mentioned earlier, Druid has problems to get rid of all big creatures yourself. So if someone facelesses my big creatures for a lower mana cost than I actually paid for to play those big creatures, let's say a Ragnaros or an Alexstrasza, Ysera, it's a really good counter to a ramp deck. So I play the big minions I decided to play are really not that vulnerable to Faceless, and I can deal with them in addition if they get Faceless, and that is also really important. And the thinking behind why I don't play cards like Cairn, because many people ask me that, or Ysera or Alexstrasza. Yeah, exactly, and that is, but instead of just not playing those big creatures, I decide to play 2 Faceless myself, because it has really good synergy with the Innovate. As I mentioned earlier, in turn 10 I can play the Ancient of War, because I will have many cards in my hand. I can play the Ancient of War into Innovate, into Faceless, and even if my opponent has a Black Knight, you can't kill both Ancient of Wars, and Black Knight would be pretty much the worst scenario. And even if he has a Faceless, I have 2 Ancient of Wars on the field, and I maybe have also the Keeper of the Grove if he facelesses my Ancient of War to silence it and kill it easily. And the next card is Sunwalker. It is, when you look at Sunwalker, it is almost as good as a Cairn. A Cairn is a 4/5 creature with 2 lives if the Death Rattle takes into effect. Sunwalker can also be a creature that can attack 2 times with 4/5 stats if you get the full effect of the Divine Shield. Exactly, and it has in addition Taunt, which is really important because you will be behind most of the time in the early game. So when you and it fits perfectly in the curve. You play the Druid of the Claw, then you follow it up with the Sunwalker into Ancient of War. People will have problems to deal with the first minion, then they will have even more problems to deal with the second minion, and usually they are out of answers for the biggest minion. And if they can't get rid of one of those creatures, they will get Faceless and it will secure me the game. And Sunwalker is also in general really good answer against handlocks. It's just in general a really good card, in my opinion. And it's much less vulnerable to Faceless, to the opponent Faceless. If my opponent gets a Cairn, it is way harder for myself to get rid of the Faceless Cairn than my Faceless Sunwalker. If someone facelesses my Sunwalker, I can use the hero ability to get rid of the Divine Shield and then kill it with a Starfall, or use my own Sunwalker to attack it and then finish the one remaining health with Wrath or a hero ability or a swipe or whatever, really. And yeah, I really like it. The next card I want to talk about is Sylvanas. It was a last minute change I decided to do. Sylvana is a really good card in the current metagame against the control decks. It is also another way for a Druid to deal with big minions. You just take them yourself. When someone plays an Ysera, you don't really have any answer right now because of the change of the Thinkmaster to get rid of an Ysera. You can silence Ysera, but he will still have a 4/12 stat creature on the board. And I can use the Sylvanas with the Mark of the Wild, which is also a good combination against aggro decks because they have to kill it, use a lot of minions to kill it, and you take over whatever is left. And it is also a really good minion to use my own Faceless on it. And when my opponent uses Faceless on Sylvanas, he can't attack immediately with it, and I can silence his Sylvanas, or I can kill my own Sylvanas and take over his Sylvanas, which is really good. It's not vulnerable to my opponent's options, and it's really strong for myself. And I'm going to the next card here, which is the Black Knight. As I mentioned earlier, it has really good synergy with Mark of the Wild. I can get rid of basically any creature I want at 8 mana, and it is really good against other ramp druids, any druids in general. It is a really good card for tournament play, because most of the decks, except rogues, will have some sort of taunt creature, and you just kill it for free, and it has good stats on top of it. The Ancient of Lore is one of the strongest cards in general from the Druid class. It has 5/5 stats, and you draw 2 cards. When you can play it in turn 5 with the Innovate, it is huge, because you draw the 2 cards. You get immediately value back from the card, and you have a 5/5 on the board, which is really solid. I don't really have to talk so much about Ancient of Lore, because most of you people understand how good this card is. Ancient of War is one of the main cards in my ramp deck. As you see, like, the only 3 big minions I have in this deck, really big minions, are the Cenarius and the 2 Ancient of Wars. I think Ancient of War is a really interesting card. It is the biggest taunter in the game with 10 health. It can also be used offensively with 10/5 to play around a opponent Black Knight, and this is also something I really like about the Druid class, because most cards have 2 options you can choose from which you can choose from. Like the Keep of the Grove, it can deal 2 damage or silence a minion. The Druid of the Claw, it can be played in charge form or in taunt form, and also the same goes for Ancient of War and Ancient of Lore. You have 2 separate effects you can choose from, which can be used in certain situations. Most of the time I will play the Ancient of War in taunt form, and when I play it, my opponent will be out of options. And when I can play it with Innovate, it is really strong. It is one of the strongest creatures in the game, if not the strongest you can play with in the combination of Innovate. And it is a really good card to be Faceless, and it is not that weak to the opponent Faceless, which is also really important. When my opponent answers to my Ancient of War with Faceless, I can use my own Faceless to get 2. I can Black Knight the opponent's Ancient of War. I can play my own Sylvanas to take over his Ancient of War next turn, or I can just silence it with the Keep of the Grove and then kill it off with my Ancient of War. So even in the worst case scenario, I can really deal effectively with, let's say, my own Ancient of War. And it is really good against every type of aggro decks, because it has 10 health, and it has good synergy with the Healing Touch. And last but not least, Cenarius, the last card in my deck. It is the biggest creature in my deck, and it is really important. And many people asked me, why do I play Cenarius? It is not that strong when you look at it. It has just 5/8 stats, and you summon two taunters. And why do I play it over Arachnorus? It is also on top of that really expensive with my 9 mana cost. So first of all, Cenarius is the only 9 mana cost card that has the effect to summon taunts. Like, it is really the difficult to develop a really high cost creature like Ysera, for example. It is really difficult in the current metagame to play this card on the board, because most of the time you will not have the board control, you will be behind, and then you play a card and you can not do anything else in that turn. And the card you get from Ysera will be completely random. So you will not know what you will be able to play in your next turn. And you don't know if your opponent has an answer to your Ysera. That is not the case with Cenarius. If my opponent has a Faceless, for example, a Faceless Manipulator, it is much weaker against Cenarius than against Ysera. He basically plays an Ysera for 5 mana and has 5 mana left, or 4 mana, depending on the turn, to deal with my Ysera. He could even play double Faceless. What I really like about this card is that the effect is split between multiple targets, which makes it much stronger against a Faceless Manipulator. You can Faceless my Cenarius, but I will still have the 2 additional taunt cards, or my other minions will be buffed by this card. It is not vulnerable to cards like Big Game Hunter, which you save for late game, or Black Knight, or all those answer cards to your big minions. My deck is really solid and really consistent and strong against most played cards which are used in decks, against certain most played other cards. Don't know if I said that correctly, because most decks play cards like Ragnaros. Yeah, to be on top in the end, you have to be one small step ahead of everyone else, and this is the small extra step I had as an advantage above everyone else, and that is also probably one reason why I ended up winning the DreamHack. So let me know if you like this deck tech and if I should do more of these in the future, and if I should make one about my Hunter deck. I didn't use my Hunter deck that often. I believe it was just in 2 games or 3 games, but I won most of my games with my Druid deck, and that's also the reason why I decided to talk about my Druid deck, because many people were interested in that. I hope you enjoyed this video, and see you guys next time.